Well, here we are with yet another video about the cut content in Halo Combat Evolved. This is Halo CE Restored, a video series and mod where I dig deep to find all the cut content in this breakthrough title. Everything that was left behind in the game's code or featured in various media like beta builds and even commercials. And this time around, I'm focusing on this iconic level, Halo, the one where we first crash land onto the mysterious Halo ring in the hopes of linking up with our lost Marine allies to rescue them and regroup. I'll be honest, I wasn't quite sure how much cut content I would find here given it already feels quite complete, but fortunately there was a lot more than I was expecting. And if you like what you see, this is part of a fully playable Steam Workshop mod, Halo CE Restored, so you can boot this up and re-experience it all for the first time again if you want. Alright, now let's get into the thick of it. Let's talk about the cut content in Halo. First up, we have an overhaul of this entire initial crash site, and by overhaul, I mean a near complete rework. This is the very start of the level, picking up right after Chief's escape with Cortana from the Pillar of Autumn, which was under siege by Covenant forces. In this section, there's a whole bunch of cut scripting and dialogue that hints at a very different sequence of events. First up, we have a different take from Cortana upon our initial wake-up.
I warned the captain that this wasn't a good idea. I should never have left the Pillar of Autumn. You're awake! Can you move?
This is from the 1749 beta version of Halo CE, a build from 2 months before the final release. Now leaving the lifeboat, we have a couple more lines of cut dialogue.
Good. I didn't want to be trapped here when the Covenant arrived. I disabled the lifeboat's signal beacon to throw off Covenant search teams. Other lifeboats probably made it down too. We should search for survivors.
This line in particular is very interesting. It very clearly hints that the player was going to have a lot more time to explore this initial landing area. In the original game, you don't get a lot of time here, which begs the question, why didn't we have more time? Is there perhaps some reason the developers decided against this? Let's dig a little deeper into this section to hopefully figure this out. We have this somewhat famous piece of cut dialogue most of you have probably heard at some point.
Interesting. The ring supports wildlife. The builders must possess incredible terraforming technology.
We know from pre-release material that the original concept for Halo had wildlife all throughout the ring, such as the rockwork. It's disguised as a rock, but it's actually not. That's how they get you. We also have the Volpard. That's this thing. Then we have the three-leg. Probably a joke in here somewhere, but I'll just leave it. But our particular wildlife of interest is the blind wolves. According to the wiki, these are apex predators found on various Forerunner installations and travel in packs similar to actual wolves. Owing to their namesake, blind wolves rely primarily on sound to direct their attacks. Something kind of fun about these wolves as well is that earlier pre-release builds of the game showed Chief riding them around like horses, which is really crazy to think about. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, none of these concepts ever made it into the final game, save for one single cut encounter in this very section of Halo. There is an encounter here called The Last Stand, and in it is a single squad simply titled Wolves. Like the blind wolves, maybe? There's nothing actually in this squad, no enemy models or spawns or really anything. Just a single squad with nothing to it but the name. And it tells us everything about how this section was scripted originally. Here's how. First, let's do some math. But don't freak out or anything, it's just some basic counting. There are exactly 8 passenger seats in this life pod. 3 of those seats contain Marines that were unfortunately killed on impact because Chief refused to wear a seatbelt, and a 1,000-pound cyborg man, that's 450 kilograms if you're over there, clunking around in a confined space is sure to do some fucking damage. Then immediately outside the lifeboat, we see another 3 Marines that probably died of cringe. So that's 3 Marines inside, 3 Marines outside. For those of you keeping track, that's 6 seats, but there's 8 seats. 8 minus 6 is 2. So there's 2 seats in this life pod with Marines unaccounted for in the base game. I don't think this was a mistake. When we combine Cortana's cut dialogue about having more time and searching for survivors, the ring supporting wildlife, and a literal encounter called The Last Stand with blind wolves in it, well, the picture becomes quite clear, doesn't it? And so this is what the player sees should they explore the area to the right, a pack of blind wolves surrounding these two unfortunate survivors. By the way, these wolves were provided courtesy of Ruby of Blue, who made them for his Halo CE Rebalance mod, where he pretty much overhauls nearly every single aspect and system of Halo CE. After disposing of those pesky wolves and making your way to your fallen Marine friends, it's at this point the countdown begins. This is the final piece of the puzzle, an unused countdown sequence where the player would only have a short time to cross the bridge and hide in the hills before the Covenant dropship starts swooping in. There's 2 cut dialogue pieces as part of this unused countdown, both warning you that you're running out of time to get to the hills. There's the first.
We should evacuate the area and find other survivors before Covenant search teams arrive.
And the second not long after.
Warning, we should evacuate the area before Covenant forces arrive.
If the player fails to start crossing the bridge by this point, the dropship just comes in anyway.
Alert, Covenant dropship inbound. They must be looking for survivors. I recommend immediate evasion.
My guess, this whole exploration and dropship countdown portion, it was all cut along with the blind wolves. Without the wolves, there's no real reason to explore, so may as well just push the player towards the hills right away, which is what ended up happening. And speaking of those hills, we do have some more cut content all revolving around that first Covenant dropship. How this dropship sequence works in the base game is once it comes in, it will always drop down near the landing zone. If you fail to get to the hills in time, you're spotted.
Alert. Covenant dropship has detected us. Here they come.
This doesn't really have any consequences other than you just have to fight some Covenant that had dropped off. There are a couple Banshees that will spawn in when you make your way up the hill, but they're scripted to always spawn in, so it doesn't really matter if the initial dropship spotted you or not. And now for the cut content. First, we've got a line of dialogue that would play if you successfully evade the dropship.
It doesn't look like they saw us, but we should leave before they spot us.
I believe this dialogue was always meant to play, but never did due to a scripting bug. Now let's talk about the dropship itself. I first want you to notice that if you were to go further up in these hills, there's a break in the trees that allows you to get a bird's eye view of the valley and, more importantly, the dropship. Now, imagine if, at this clearing, not only can you see the dropship can also see you. Well, you don't have to imagine it. This was actually meant to happen. There's scripting in the CE beta to do this very thing. Granted, it didn't work very well, but the vision was there. To facilitate this dropship sequence in a way that's not completely confusing to a new player, I did add a nav marker in the forested area that marks the safe place to hold out. As long as you stay by that marker, the dropship won't spot you. Also in service to this new stealth quotations mission, I also switched those 2 Banshees I mentioned to only spawn in if you're spotted by the dropship, almost like they were radioed in. I will be honest though, even after fully restoring this sequence with all the fixes, it still does make perfect sense why they cut this. Even with the nav marker, multiple people that playtested this for me just didn't know they could sit tight here and avoid being spotted if I didn't outright tell them. And unfortunately, there's no way for me to communicate this without breaking some fourth wall, which I really don't want to do. Now, before moving on to the first Marine area, I'd like to note a few other cuts in this section. First up, there's a chapter title during the opening cutscene. Instead of Flawless Cowboy like in the retail version, the 1749 beta instead had Arrival, which is significantly more boring. But hey, I never said everything was fun. Next, we have some unused jackal spawns in the hills. And last, but certainly not least, is my favorite little developer script, possibly in the whole franchise. It's not technically a piece of cut content, but I'm going to talk about it anyway, because most of you probably don't know about Go to Hell, biatch. Yeah, this is a real script that the developer Jamie Grishmer programmed into the game. Here's how it works. If you've ever played around with the Acrophobia skull, the one that lets you fly all around and explore, you may have noticed that in this first area of Halo, if you fly up too high, suddenly you can't move. The game just stops responding to your inputs. This is not a glitch. It's go to hell, biatch. To put it in technical terms, there's a big ass trigger volume in the sky that if you enter it, the game turns off all your inputs. At least until you fall out of the trigger volume, in which case it turns them back on. I was very curious why the hell go to hell is here, biatch. So I asked Jamie Grishmer about it on Twitter, and he actually responded. So here's the scoop. Apparently some of those pesky playtesters figured out how to climb the sides of the canyon somehow. Not sure how, but they figured it out. And that led to them breaking the level. They figured this all out a few weeks prior to the game's hands-off deadline, so Jamie did not have a lot of leeway to fix this. In other words, minimal changes. He had to get creative. So he simply sent them to hell, biatch. Anyway, just a funny story that still remains in the game to this day. Alright, now let's move on to the first Marine area. This is where you make contact with other Marine survivors that escaped the Pillar of Autumn, and has you teaming up to fight multiple waves of Covenant as you wait for Foehammer to pick you up. First up for this section, we've got shotguns. Yes, this was part of the original sequencing for Halo CE. The shotgun was going to be present much earlier in the game. It was instead to be the flamethrower that was going to be introduced as part of the second act. When the flamethrower was ultimately cut, the shotgun took its place and was scrubbed from the earlier levels. Fortunately, the 1749 beta predates the flamethrower being cut, so by referencing this build, we get to see where and how the shotguns were implemented on the earlier levels before their eventual removal. For this level in particular, there were going to be Marines with shotguns present in this first Marine area. Unfortunately, in the beta, it was only the Marines that had shotguns. There weren't any scattered around that you could pick up. So unless you acquire one from the Marines somehow, you're not getting a shotgun. But not to worry, in the restoration, you don't have to kill the Marines to take their shotgun. I put a couple up on the structure that you can just pick up. Like, you don't have to, you don't have to. Moving on, so the rest of this section is just cut dialogue. First up, we have an extra dialogue line about a dropship landing to the rear.
Damn it! Another Covenant landing craft to the rear!
I believe this was meant to be an alternate line to this one.
Uh-oh! Another bandit dropping in behind us! They're trying to flank us!
I went ahead and worked this cut line into when you first arrive, fits here rather nicely. Next up, we have an unused line from Johnson telling everyone to retreat back to the main tower.
Fall back, Marines! Back to that main structure! Move! Move!
This would play around the time you see the final two dropships coming in, and the Marines are actually scripted to retreat back to the tower too, so it closes that loop rather nicely. And my final note on this section is a unique player death that unfortunately never worked correctly in the retail build. It all revolves around these little Forerunner orbital cannon things that you see shooting up into the sky. There's two of these on this level that feature the unique death. The first is in this very area with the Marines, but there's also a second at the river objective later in the level. In the base game, there's a trigger volume at each of these two cannons where there's scripting that would induce a damage effect if you entered it. Unfortunately, in the final game, they put an invisible barrier preventing you from falling down to where it is, so you'd never actually be able to see this in action. So, as part of this restoration, I moved this trigger volume higher up to where the blue flame is. Now, if you jump into it, you get the damage effect. It's a subtle thing, but I really like cool death Easter eggs like this. And next up we have, hey Grok, what type of cave is this?
This cave is not a natural formation.
So cool. I will now start a parasocial relationship. So yeah, upon Foehammer dropping off our Warthog, we see 3 additional lifeboats crash down in an area up ahead. Since we're like the big hero or something, we resolve to get there and rescue them. The path forward to get to those lifeboats goes through a passageway known as the Natural Formation. First up, we have some dialogue that Cortana says to the player after Foehammer drops off the Warthog.
Survivors will probably stick close to their emergency beacons. We need to find where the lifeboats landed.
This line is not cut, by the way, but you've likely not heard it before. Reason being, you'd have to wait around this first area for a ridiculously long time to be able to hear it in the retail build.
Survivors will probably stick close to their emergency beacons.
I, for one, never even knew it existed before looking into this, so to make sure people actually hear it, I made it play upon getting into the Warthog. It winds up fitting here perfectly. Next up, we have some more blind wolves. Didn't make too much sense to have them only in one single area without a follow-up, so all around the level you'll find blind wolves just kind of chilling out. There are some on the way of the Natural Formation, and some more scattered all around the intermediate areas between the 3 Marine rescue objectives. I also added some dead wolves around as flavor, showing that some lifeboats successfully fended them off, minus some casualties of course. Now moving on to the light bridge section, there were some unused jackal spawns by the bridge itself, and also a Warthog Marine encounter that just so happened to have some spawns nearby. So using these two in tandem, I created a squad of Marines and a Warthog that unfortunately met their untimely end before the player arrived. Those cut jackals would then be seen surrounding it. And now we have some more dialogue.
There must be some mechanism to cross this chasm. Look for a control panel or switch.
Okay, so similar to the one when we first get the Warthog, this line was not actually cut, but had a whole bunch of requirements, including killing every single enemy in this huge section before it would play. So in other words, it was very rare to hear. To that end, I cleaned up the scripting so it will always play and you'll never miss it. And finally, after the light bridge and on your way outside, in the 1749 beta build, there'd be this little DLC area you'd see as you're driving through. The wall from the retail build, it wasn't a wall in the beta, and it was instead a hallway hallway that you can actually drive down. However, it doesn't actually lead anywhere, just a dead end. Yeah, I know, but wait, there's a second opening as well. Well, it's also just a dead end. The whole concept here of a maze-like interior portion you can drive through likely harkens back to when this level was actually broken up into multiple levels, with this one inside the formation likely being the level called Manufacturing Facility. For the restoration, I actually did not restore these DLC hallways just because the whole rest of the 1749 load zone has a lot of oddities in terms of lighting and pathfinding that would have been just way too much a pain to smooth over. If you really want to see the hallway, I do have a 1749 port on the workshop that has the hallway. So, have fun, I guess. Now let's move on to the 3 areas, the open world section of the game. This section follows Chief as he races towards the crashed lifeboats from earlier. They crashed in 3 distinct areas: cliff, rubble, and finally, river. What makes this open world quotations is that you can do these 3 areas in any order you choose, and there's no nav marker. The developers clearly intended for this section to be all about exploration. And explore we shall. First, let's mosey on over to Cliff. It's called Cliff because there's a cliff. In case you didn't know. This section is a little unique with regards to the marine survivors because the crashed lifeboat is not actually in this area, it's just outside it, which Cortana and the Marines will remark about.
Lifeboat detected. No sign of survivors.
Man, what a mess. The weapons lockers must have broken open. There's weapons and supplies all over the place. Where's the bodies, though?
These are the lines you'll hear in the base game, but did you know there's a third unused dialogue line?
We really should search the area for survivors before we leave.
This one is from the beta version and serves to inform the player that they need to go and explore this cliff area to hopefully find the Marines nearby. So you go in and explore the cliff area just to find the Covenant have it completely secured. And as you make your way towards the large structure in the center, you just barely catch an elite out of the corner of your eye. You ready your weapon, but suddenly he darts away down what appears to be an entrance to some underground labyrinth. Following him down leads you directly to those Marine survivors, which, after saving the day and clearing out the remaining Covenant forces, has Foehammer then come to pick them up. This elite that I mentioned earlier that you would see running down the labyrinth is part of a cut encounter called Draw Elite. The idea behind it was to non-verbally, almost organically tell an observant player where to go next. It took a lot of doing and scripting hacks to get it working properly, which is probably why it was cut. Next up, we have Old Waiting Marine. So, after clearing out all the Covenant, Foehammer swoops in for the rescue, but picks what is quite possibly the worst place to land. Okay, not like literally the worst, but it's not exactly great. There's like rocks and stuff everywhere. In that time that Foehammer is flying in, the remaining Marines will attach themselves to the Waiting Marine encounter. All it really does is tether them to the landing site so they're ready to go once Foehammer lands. Nothing crazy. And that's where Old Waiting Marine comes in. This encounter instead tethers the Marines to wait over by the clearing on the other side, where there's not like rocks and other shit, you know, probably a better place to land. As this cut encounter likely implies, well, this was where Foehammer was going to land originally. For whatever reason though, they changed it to the other side at some point in development. My guess is they just wanted this camera angle on the final cutscene. Unfortunately, there's no trace of Foehammer's cut landing recording. I looked in the game files, the beta, but nothing. Which means that to restore Foehammer's cut landing location, I had to do the recording myself. If you missed my previous video on Assault in the Control Room, allow me to remind you about the vehicle recordings. So we're in the dropship. Now to start an actual input capture. Well, you have to press caps lock, which then opens up a dialog window where you type in a script to run whenever a capture starts. You can use this to teleport the dropship to the recording start flag. So you start typing and, oh yeah, right, caps lock is on. You gotta press it again. Exciting stuff, I know. And then when you finally get all that sorted, you realize that these dropships control like complete dog shit. Yeah, you know, this is now I get to do it all again. So this specific restoration was threefold. First, I had to make a landing animation. So I flew the dumb boat and landed it nice and gentle in the clearing on the other side. Second, I had to make a takeoff animation. This one was significantly easier than the landing animation because it doesn't matter what I do when it gets off the map. Landing, I gotta make it look pretty, not all jerky and bad, but taking off, I can just crash into the side of a mountain and you'd never know. And last, but certainly not least, I had to make a cutscene. Yeah, so if you do Cliff as the very last area, it's also where Foehammer picks you up to end the level. This is accompanied by an ending cutscene. The problem, of course, is now Foehammer is taken off from the other side of the area and the camera is not placed with that in mind. So I had to move this camera, fix up the interpolation on the movements, clean up the timings, recheck and move the camera because it looked bad, which also meant redoing the timings and interpolation. Then I had to completely redo the sound design because it's stereo and it's takeoff animation playing in the right ear, but it needs to be taking off towards the left, so it can't have your right ear. It's gotta sound in the left. All just to build this nice cutscene.
We should move out, Lieutenant, and then we'll need your help on a rescue mission.
Now stop. Let's just back up for a second. Did I have to do all this? No, really, did I have to do all this work just to have Foehammer land over here instead of over there? No, I really didn't. I honestly don't know why I did it. I kept wondering this as I was doing it. I don't know who in the world actually cares that developers maybe once upon a time thought about having Foehammer coming in over here. Let's just move on, man. All right, Rubble. There's rocks. That's why it's called that. This one has Marines holed up in the center of a bunch of large boulders as they're beset by a squad of Covenant. And this all brings us to the invisible monsters conversation. After clearing out that initial wave of Covenant, there's a whole entire dialogue sequence that goes unused in the final game.
Stand by, Marines. I've called Echo 419 for evac. We should dust off shortly.
Quiet! They'll hear you!
Who's out there? I can't detect any Covenant forces in the vicinity.
I don't know. They're monsters or something. Invisible monsters.
Very likely the invisible monsters he's referring to are stealth elites, cloaked in transparent camouflage, but for some reason almost always carrying a big glowy sword. Right here in Rubble is where camo elites were originally going to be introduced. Unfortunately, there's no encounter data left behind that would hint at what exactly they were planning for their big reveal, so I had to improvise. Decided to keep it nice and simple. After the invisible monsters dialogue concludes, some camo elites will then rush the position and fight the player and Marines. If you don't know what to expect it can be a bit of a jump scare, which is how I reckon they do it. I'm guessing Bungie cut this because they wanted the camo elites on Truth and Reconciliation to hit just right. And that's actually it for Rubble, not too much here. So let's just move on to our final section, this one called River. It's called that because it's next to a river. This section has a squad of Marines taking cover up in the hills above another one of those orbital cannons. Now for the cut content. First up, we have an unused dialogue line from Sergeant Johnson that would play when you reach the top of the hill.
You're a sight for sore eyes, Chief. We're in a bad way. We got wounded here.
You might recognize this line as an alternative to the one that you'd hear Mendoza play in the retail game.
You're a sight for sore eyes, Chief. We're in a bad way. We've got wounded here.
The reason the Johnson variant of this dialogue went unused is simply because there's no Johnson spawn. No Johnson spawn, no Johnson dialogue. Next up is the wounded sniper. Upon reaching the top of the hill in retail, you'll find a dead Marine leaning up against a rock with his sniper rifle in plain view. However, he wasn't always going to be dead on arrival. He's actually part of a cut encounter called Flavor River Sniper that would instead have him alive but fatally wounded. Upon approaching him, you'd get some dialogue too.
I think I got a few of those Covenant bastards, but I'm hit! Take my sniper rifle, sir!
And after this dialogue concludes, he unfortunately perishes from his injuries. This is such a cool piece too, my favorite of the three areas, honestly. I'm not sure why it was cut either. The Marine seems to work perfectly fine, no odd behaviors or anything. And finally, we have an unused second wave. After you make contact with the Marines and clear out a certain number of enemies below, a Covenant dropship would then swoop in to drop off one additional wave. However, it wasn't always going to be just this one single wave. They're scripting for a second additional wave coming in before the one we see in retail. Unlike at Cliff, there was a recording left behind for this dropship, however, it's just really bad. Honestly, I had to redo it, and while I was redoing it, it became very clear why it was cut. There's honestly just no room to land a second dropship. I literally had to chop down one of the damn trees just so I could have some space to land this sucker. But you have nothing to fear. I am an environmentalist, so I replanted 2 trees to make up for it. Not that it really matters. Getting rid of this inconvenient obstacle gave me a little more wiggle room to come in and land for this unused wave. Following from the left behind scripting, I put some elites on one side and jackals on the other. Then, rather than have it only come in after killing some enemies below, which honestly killed the pacing of the section, I instead had the dropship come in around the time you arrive at river, so you see it swooping in as you're talking to the Marines. It all worked out rather swimmingly, and the combat pacing felt good and, more importantly, fun. What wasn't fun though is I once again had to create a dropship recording. I'm gonna complain about it every single time I have to do it. And that's it for all things specific to each area, but we also have some cut content that spans all 3 areas. First up is the final Banshees, where whichever area you complete last, there'd be some additional Banshees you'd have to fight. These Banshees must be destroyed as part of area completion. In other words, Foehammer won't come in and end the level until you kill them. Now, next up for the 3 areas is each have their own unique piece of cut dialogue called Abandoned Final. Whichever area you saved for last would have its own unique dialogue line from Cortana if you tried to leave without getting picked up by Foehammer.
We can't leave yet. We need to wait for the dropship.
I say all this dialogue was cut, but really it's just because the abandoned scripting was a complete mess. Like, the easiest way to restore all this was just to completely rewrite it. And finally is a change not to this level, but to Silent Cartographer. With the addition of the blind wolves to Halo, I wanted to go back and add them to levels where it would also make sense to have them. Looking at the levels I've restored so far, 343 Guilty Spark, literal swamp filled with flood. I don't think wolves would make a nice home out of a swamp filled with flood. Assault on the Control Room is a winter wasteland, specifically designed to be as difficult to traverse as possible in order to impede flood movement in the event they got loose. Also not a very good home for wolves, especially these ones. They'll get all cold. So that leaves Silent Cartographer, a literal beach island paradise with nice forested areas in the center. Perfect sort of environment to house some more wolves. To set this up properly, we first need some environmental design. When you're heading towards the security room to unlock the main facility, it takes you towards that nice foresty area that I mentioned earlier. Except it's completely taken over by the Covenant, like a whole platoon you see while going up the hill, hunters at the very top, more enemies as you make your way to the facility itself. There's a lot of them. I wanted to design this whole section according to the principles of Chekhov's gun, which is the narrative ideal that every element in a story should be relevant. In other words, if you show a gun, there must be a reason for it, such as being fired by some character at some point later. The point is to remove irrelevant things from the story you're telling. Although, honestly, now that I think about it, I think what I'm really doing here might just be generic foreshadowing, which is me letting you know the wolves are coming up again later. Foreshadowing is very related to Chekhov's gun though, kind of like a cousin. Which, on that note, a surprising amount of states in the US would actually allow them to marry if they were cousins. But like, to be fair, some have restrictions. Like Arizona says the gun and the shadow can marry if they're both 65 or older, or one is infertile. The reason we need some environmental foreshadowing here is the wolves will not be featured in Truth and Reconciliation. I haven't restored it yet, but it's a literal desert plateau high up in the cliffs. Doesn't really make sense to me to have these cute little creatures high up in the desert cliffs. Just doesn't really seem like a good environment for them. This means the player has gone a whole level without seeing them and probably forgot about them. To that end, I first set up some flavor. In the forest area of Silent Cartographer, you'll see some dead wolves scattered around in certain places and corners. The idea here is that the Covenant cleared them out some time before you arrived and perhaps moved them away from their firing lines. Not only is it some excellent world building and organic storytelling, it's also indirectly telling you that, hey, those blind wolves from Halo, well, they'll be making another appearance here too. Now for the big payoff. After clearing out the Covenant and deactivating the security system, upon your return, there they are, rushing down the hill directly towards you. It's kind of adorable, honestly, but don't be fooled, they'll definitely kill you. As a bonus, the wolves rushing down the hill lines up perfectly with a dropship that landed at the center structure. So you, the player, cleared out the area, which the blind wolves then began to cautiously explore and repopulate when all of a sudden a Covenant dropship came in and spooked them down the hill directly towards you. Works out perfectly. And that is all I have to show you today. That is the cut content in Halo. Everything discussed here is made fully available through Halo CE Restored, my mod which you can find on the Steam Workshop. I'll throw a link down below where you can go check it out for yourself. I also host votes after each one of these videos where you can vote on which level I cover next. I can't guarantee every level will be this fruitful, but I will at least find something to talk about. So if you have any strong opinions here, make sure you subscribe so you can make them known. So yeah, I'm signing off now. Bye.